Kia ora everyone. As Angie said, I'm Alastair Suren. I'm with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. I've only been in the Bay of Plenty region for a couple of years. I'm ex-Christchurch, and it's really great to be up here. I really love it up here in the Bay. So we're talking about some work which I've been really happy and really enthused to be involved with, looking at differences between Maori cultural health indices of looking at stream health and Western science. I'm just going to talk about how we use invertebrates from a Western point of view to monitor stream health, because a lot of people don't really know what we do as ecologists, so I'm just going to run through briefly with that. We'll do a bit of a tag team up here. Wally will then take over and talk about the way we assess stream health and a methodology that has been developed to assess stream health. And then we'll swap between myself and Wally to talk about the results of the study and then the implications and what it all means. And I think there's some really exciting stuff ahead, and I think the Regional Council has got a lot of challenges ahead of itself to try and do things better in terms of dealing with iwi issues. So in terms of how we look at health of rivers from a Western point of view, we use invertebrates, and these are small things like aquatic insects, shrimps, snails, midges, etc. And they play, whoops, I was told not to press the top button. I won't find the laser. They're really important in streams. They play a very vital ecological role. They're food for a whole range of fish, they're food for a whole range of birds. What the invertebrates do is they eat the algae, they eat the decaying leaf litter, they convert this plant material into their own biomass, and they're eaten by fish and by birds. And basically without invertebrates, we, mammals, and larger animals can't live, because the invertebrates are this link between primary producers, the plants, and the animals. Now, aquatic invertebrates, they live in streams for quite a long time, from weeks to months up to about a year, some of them. And they're quite sedentary. Unlike a fish, they don't go for kilometres up a stream. They live within a very small area of a stream, maybe tens to hundreds of metres, maybe 500 metres at the most. So they don't actually hoon around a lot. We also know from a lot of research which has been going on over, ecology is about 100-year-old science. So in that 100 years, we've actually learnt that some animals like cool water, low nutrients, shade, other animals can tolerate high nutrients, warm waters, etc. So we have what we call known environmental preferences of all the invertebrates. And the other thing about them is they're quite easy to identify. So we can go to a stream, take a sample and look at what's there. And by what's there, we can interpret how healthy the stream is. So because of these factors about them, the fact that they're always there, they act almost like little wee integrators of overall conditions. So unlike water chemistry, which changes hourly or daily, the invertebrates are there integrating everything that happens, both the water chemistry, the habitat, and also the flow regime. So they're like these little wee tiny integrators that basically collate all the environmental information about them. And so this makes them very ideal to monitor the environmental conditions in streams. And as I said, they act as integrators of all the environmental conditions, so that's water chemistry, hydrology, and habitat at a site. So by using invertebrates, we have what we call an objective and consistent measure of stream health. However, it actually does require a fairly high level of skill to use invertebrates. You've got to be taught how to identify them, and that takes a bit of time. It's also quite costly, and it's quite a complicated procedure. So that's the downside to them, but there's a lot of advantages as well. So how we assess stream health, this is just an example of a pasture stream. And you can see here that it's very open. There'll be a lot of nutrient inputs. It'll have warm temperature, lots of algae, etc. And the animals over there will be like the snails, the worms, the midges. And so those animals are characteristic of these streams, which are warm, soft bottom, lots of nutrients, lots of algae. Other streams of better ecological health have got moderate nutrients, not as much algae, lower temperature because there's a bit of shade, and we're finding animals like the riffle beetles, some of the caddisflies, some mayflies, but you still find your snails and your worms, but not as much. And then in your pristine reference site streams like native bush, these are what we call excellent ecological health, so low temperature, low nutrients, not much algae, good substrate. And we've got lots of what we call the EPT, the Ephemeroptera, mayfly, P for Plecoptera, stoneflies, and T for Trichoptera, caddisflies. So they're your EPT taxa, and they're indicative of really, really good health. So to assess ecological condition, what we've done over the years, and a guy called John Stark developed this in the late 80s in Taranaki, was he allocated all of these animals, like the midges, the midges, the snails and the worms, he gave those a low score. So they had a low tolerance score. The other animals, which we're finding in medium ecological health streams, have a medium tolerance score, and the other animals, which we find in the excellent streams, have a high tolerance score. So what we do is we calculate a thing called the MCI, the Macroinvertebrate Community Index. So this is like another index that ecologists use. You all know what the TLI is, and that measures lake health. The MCI measures invertebrate health in streams. And basically we go to a site, we find out what animals there are, we add up their tolerance scores, and that gives us a number, as I've just said there. So we just see what's there, give the tolerance score and add that all up. And we have 4 quality classes that we can define from this. So if we go to a site and we find all these animals have got low scores, we're going to end up with a low number like 80, and that indicates it's in poor condition. If, however, we go to a site and we have a lot of animals of high scores, like 8s, 9s and 10s, we're going to have an MCI of over 120. That means it's excellent condition. So that's how we can assess stream health from a Western point of view. So I'll pass over to Wally, and he's going to talk about assessing stream health from a cultural view. Wally.
Thanks, Alastair. Just to start, just to make you all aware that where we are right now, directly behind us, just probably 10 metres down the road here, or down a path, is the Puarenga River. Now, our communities back in the old days, and even now, continued to live on the banks of rivers such as the Puarenga and other rivers around Rotorua, and you would have heard our Ngāti Rangi Wewahi whānau also have kāinga and marae on the banks of the rivers. And there's a specific reason for that, and that reason is our rivers supplied us with the food, because we had no pack and save obviously in those days of subsistence living. So we lived off the rivers, we lived off the lands. And if you think about the Puarenga now, where you basically can't live off it, there's no food as in the old days coming through the river and the streams, but that's why we live there. So a part of our cultural health and teaming up with Alastair was a lot of the historical background as to how the rivers and streams used to be, and bringing it forward into today and to how they are now. So we took, which is the more holistic side of what we're doing, and as Alastair says, it's a little bit more subjective, and that history was being passed down from generation to generation, and the stories that were told from parent to grandparent, grandparents to all of us that have come down the generations. We first, we didn't have a measure. My colleague and I, Peter State, we've been on this journey for quite some time now, and we didn't have a measure in terms of how do we measure a stream from a cultural health index, but we found a model from Gail Tipper and Lauren Turney, I think it is, and they had a model based on the Canterbury, South Canterbury. So we took parts of their model, and so then we started to assess the stream, predominantly the Puarenga, based on their model. Okay, so as I spoke before, the traditional association of the site to Māori, the maintenance of mahinga kai resources, the presence and the abundance of mahinga kai. Mahinga kai is the food that we can gather, or the food that we used to gather. The ability to harvest the species as in the past, and the ability to access a site. So whether or not it's open, whether or not it's all built up and it's now on private land, where once upon a time we used to harvest. The cultural stream health measure is made up of a number of different indicators, which is a bit more objective and an accurate reflection of tangata whenua evaluations of stream health. Tangata whenua is simply meaning the people of the land or the people of a certain area. So we had the catchment land use, whether it's changed, and obviously in this area it's very heavily industrialised. Riparian vegetation, whether there's weeds, native vegetation, channel modifications, where the tractors have come down in the past and dug big channels and straightened rivers, whereas The natural meandering effect of a river has been taken out. River flow, water quality, water clarity, the riverbed condition, again, whether that's been modified, whether there's algal growth on the bottoms, and so on, and the use of the riparian margins, whether or not, again, they've been built up, the plant life has been taken away. And another big part of the riparian margins and the vegetation are the weeds. If there's a lot of weed cover like blackberry, broom, wattle, they also have a significant effect on our cultural values. Problems of generic cultural stream health measure the differences in iwi traditions. Like I said, we took this from the South Island, and obviously in the north, totally different environment. Our cultural connection to the waterways, and that varies from tribe to tribe, and our natural environmental differences. As we've heard from other reports tonight, the Tarawera eruption had a significant effect on the lake beds and what happened to our coda stocks in those lakes. I just mentioned that generic CHM may not be relevant for Ngāti Awa. Alastair's in the process of developing a similar process that we've just went through for Ngāti Awa in the Ngāti Awa River Forum. And what may be good for us in Te Arawa may not necessarily suit the people of Ngāti Awa, and so on and so on. Okay, that's just some of the stuff where the information came from. Catchment land use, riverbanks, been through some of that. Uses of the river, water quality, river flow, clarity, change of habitats. The mahinga kai is very interesting because would we taste the water in some of the streams out here? No, we wouldn't. Would we taste the water in some of the other streams like the Hamarana? Yeah, I probably would. But then again, would we fish here? That's a big question. Again, we base that on water quality, whether or not we can even see fish, the quality of the bugs that come through. When we did the surveys, the other side to this is we actually conducted our surveys alongside Alastair students, and that was a very, very interesting learning process for all of us. Safe eating fish, safe to swim, and food sources present, and they're all given an indicative score, which Alastair will go through. Yes, can we use the generic CSHM in the Bay of Plenty, or do we develop a new indicator? Something to consider is, in one of the score sheets it says the mahinga kai are the bird species. Obviously, whether there's kiriru, kōkako, our native birds, which we actually no longer eat and are protected, they've actually given a score inside of the CSHM. It's not necessarily relevant to how we conduct the survey. In saying that, the new indicator that I was thinking about as I was sitting there listening to Ian and Ricky Hana was that we need to develop a survey based on our native fish species, not necessarily for kai purposes, although the coda, yes, could very well be, but the quality of the stream and the life that was in it. And just to give you a little story, once upon a time, there's just a little rock on the edge of the stream just down here. Certain times of the year, our people used to harvest and sit there with their basically the whitebait nets from the old days, and they used to pull out kilos and kilos and feed the village from inanga, which is our baby koaro, and that's in this river here, which no longer happens. So what I'm saying there is we actually do need to further develop this model to suit Te Arawa, and every other tribal grouping needs to develop it that suits themselves or suits their own rohe and waterways. I'll just go back to the koaro. Now, oh no. You told me not to push that button, didn't you? Okay, now there's a stream. There's a stream and it runs down the back, if you know Rotorua, the back of Tachikawa. And it's a cut drain. Probably once upon a time was actually a meandering little stream. Calvin, who was with us, actually found a kōaro in the stream. It's not a deep stream, it's only probably about that wide, about that deep. But he found a kōaro there, beautiful little kōaro, and he put it in this thing, and it started climbing, as you say, started climbing up the ice cream container that we had it in, and it was just up there at the back of Tachikawa. And so that was really, really interesting, and it gave us hope that restoration can occur, because our native fish species do actually survive in these habitats, as dirty as they may seem or are. The other interesting point is at the confluence of the Puarenga, up by the mountain bike, where the mountain bike car park is up there. Again, our students found a little baby coda in a place where I never ever thought there would be one, but there was. It was there. It was this little baby coda, and again, that gave us hope that no matter how dirty a situation or a receiving environment is, there is hope for restoration and improvement. This must be you.
So I'm just going to go through very quickly the results of the survey, just in very broad details. One of the key findings was we actually surveyed a huge variety of streams. So luckily enough, we weren't surveying all good streams or bad streams. We surveyed a huge range of stream health. So we had various sizes of streams, going from very small to very large. Being a science geek, I've got a thing called a habitat score, which I go off and measure various habitat parameters like shade and substrate and velocity and things like that, and I develop a habitat score. It's a bit like the MCI score. Low scores is poor habitat, and high scores is excellent habitat, so we had a wide range of habitats as well. I also did a land index thing. Basically, an urban land has a very low land index score, and native bush has a very high index score, so I developed all these. And the take-home message is here we had a huge range of streams, so there's lots of these environmental gradients working in the 37 streams that we surveyed. The MCI went from 55, which is really poor, up to 137, which is really excellent, so that emphasises that wide range of ecological health. And we had the mayfly, stonefly, caddisfly. Some sites had absolutely none, so very low condition, and others we actually had 30 different species in one site, so that's really, really brilliant. The cultural stream health scores, each of the attributes that Wally talked about, you score 1 or 5, and the actual, you just add all those up and divide by the total number to get the average. So the lowest score for a cultural stream health measure is 1, which is your low score, and the highest score is 5. And again, we had a great range there. So because I'm a science geek, I like to put things on graphs and have wee numbers. And you can see there's a very strong relationship between the cultural stream health measure and the MCI score. So that suggests that streams with high cultural values also support good invertebrate communities, or vice versa. If you've got a good invertebrate community, it means you're likely to have a stream with a high cultural score. However, you see that line is what we call the line of best fit, so that's like the average line that explains the relationship between the two. But those blue arrows show that there's a lot of variability in the score. So although overall I can say that yes, the two methods are similar, it means there are some differences between the two methods, otherwise we'd have a very, very tight fitting line. And to me, the differences are the important things, and I'll just quickly go through the Puarenga. We did a particular case study. We had the 37 sites from throughout the region, but then we just focused on the Puarenga because, as Wally said, that's very, very culturally important to iwi. And we also know it's got a lot of water quality problems to it, which reduces the cultural values. So, for example, we've got the Rotorua land treatment system, and that's applying the sewage to the land, and that affects the cultural values of the Puarenga. We've got the red stag sawmill. We've got a lot of historic contamination. We've got modern day stormwater runoff coming from that. And we've got landfill leachates in the Tuareparepo stream, and again, that will affect cultural values. And then we've got land use above there as well. So I'll pass back to Wally, and he can explain some really interesting differences between the scientific method and the cultural method. And to me, this highlights both the similarities, but also these really important differences, which I think as a council we have to be aware of and try and set our policies and rules cognizant of these differences. Wally.
I think you're better off carrying on. Although there was no significant relationships found, again, I've talked of the Puringa, and there's a long historical background to industrial inputs into the Puringa, which basically destroyed the food source that we once had. In saying that, the MCI still came up that there were these little bugs still growing along the edges of the stream, even though historically and contemporarily we know that the water quality is not good, but these little creatures are quite resilient, except when we get down to the mouth. Oh, the other side to that is there's a couple of farms up in the catchment as well that that also should have been part of the last slide. 2 sites had lower MCI scores than expected, and I believe one of those was down at the mouth of the Puringa, Alastair, where when we did the survey we found a little red worm, and that was it. There was nothing else growing down there. High natural geothermal inputs, but it's also the main receiving environment at the end of the land treatment system, red stag, the road runoff and everything else that comes through. There are other drains that drain the town centre and various other industrial inputs a little bit further down, and basically they all end up down at the mouth of the Puringa. And yeah, there's only a little red glowworm that grows there. It was quite sad to see.
So overall, we found when you look at all 37 sites, there was a good relationship between the stream health by cultural measures and the Western science measures. But when we look at the Puringa, just take that up from that big subset of, from the big survey of 37 sites, there was no significant differences, okay? And to me this is really important because it emphasises that there are quite fundamental different world viewpoints about how we assess health of a waterway from a Western science point of view or a cultural point of view. And to me, one of the things, I'll see if I can go back here, I can go back. The sites with the red circle, that suggests that from a biological point of view, we've got really healthy communities, but those sites were actually taken in the areas of the Rotorua RDC land treatment system, so they're receiving human effluent. And from a cultural point of view, that score is really, really low. And Wally's taught me this thing about kai uta ki tai, which is the whole connectivity of catchments, how catchments go from mountains to sea. Now, from a Western point of view, we can actually put a contaminant into a river like human sewage, and from an ecological point of view, the river will self-cleanse. So 2 or 3 or 4 kilometres downstream, it's perfectly okay. But from a cultural point of view, that's a huge no-no. So that's the fundamental difference. So that we don't share the view of Western science in terms of diluting contaminants. So I'll just quickly summarise where to from now, because I think there's some really exciting challenges ahead. I think we are in the ability now as a council to consider using cultural methods to assess stream health. And I think it's about time that as a council we decide to use cultural measures and build them into the council policies and rules. And we should be able to say things like, at the moment we can say you can have a particular land use activity or point source discharge which can't affect ecological health. Well, why can't we say it can't affect cultural health as well? I think that's a logical extension of what we should do as a council. Likewise, another really good thing about the cultural values is it relies on whakapapa. So in a way, I could go to Wally or go to someone else at Kaimātua and say, what was the value of that stream historically? And that's something that as an ecologist I can't do because I wasn't around to see what it was like historically. So whakapapa has a really important point and part to play in terms of cultural health, especially as what streams used to be like. And lastly, we can do really funky things like looking at relationships between cultural health and flow, and that's really relevant when we're talking about abstracting water from streams. We can do it from an ecological point of view, but we have to also look at this from a cultural point of view. So there's lots of challenges I think that we've faced, and I've had some robust discussions with Wally, and it's been a really learning process on both sides. There's this inherent tension because science and planning is all about a number, and how do you convert this great holistic concept of Māori into a number? And that's an inherent tension. We also need to protect Mataranga Maori as taonga, and there might be some tension in making that publicly available, so we have to try and work our way through that as well. And lastly, as Wally's alluded to, we have to decide, do we try and use a generic cultural measure, in which case we can look at the cultural values of all sites throughout the country or throughout the region, or do we have to develop specific ones for a particular rohe or iwi? So I think there's some really exciting stuff ahead, and I'm looking forward to carrying on my work with Wally and with others to sort of further this really exciting challenge. Thank you.